Hey everyone, so I've been asked a lot how I get smooth blends with my brush. Um, I hope this video will answer this question once and for all. First of all, and I think this might be what's tripping people up, is it's important to make sure your image size is big enough. Brushes behave differently depending on what your image size is. So let me just show you the difference. I'll make 3 documents. One will be web 640 by 480 at 72 dpi. One will be, let's make it 1600 by 1200. And one I'll use the preset US paper, which is 2550 by 3300 at 300 dpi. Okay, and I'll use the brush, it's called Spatter 24 pixels. Okay, so let's check out the difference. On the 640 by 480, this is what the brush looks like. Okay, and this one, this is 1600 by 1200, and this is the US paper. Now, when I do my pencil lines, the thinner lines, I usually keep it around 7, 8, 9, 10 pixels, and it looks like this, or let me pick bigger. Things kind of look like this. Can zoom in a bit. Yeah, that's better. So the lines are pretty crisp and clean. If I do the same thing on the smaller resolution image, if I want to get thin lines, I have to go down to about 2 pixels, and then it just doesn't look as smooth. I can't get as much variation. You'll notice it looks lighter. That's because I'm using a texture brush, and at 2 pixels there is virtually no texture to be had, so the brush won't behave properly. In this bigger image, it's better, but it's still not what I like. If I go to 8 pixels, it's too big, but now the brush is actually behaving alright. And here I'm still only at 25%. If I went to 100%, then you can see that it just works so much better. When I'm using a really big size, let's say 96, it'll show much more clearly the difference. Just seems to flow much nicer on a big image. So I usually use bigger images. Right now I'm using a lot this custom size I created, which is 16 by 9 inches, or 4800 by 2700 pixels at 300 dpi. And I just created this one because I prefer the 16 by 9 aspect ratio, which is the same as most widescreen monitors. Okay, so now let's say your image size is right, but you're still not getting results. How do we fix that? Well, you definitely need to be using a tablet pen and not just your mouse. Maybe I'll show you how to blend with a mouse later on. But for now, everything I'm showing only applies if you're using a tablet. I'm currently using an Intel 3 12x9 tablet. So what if you're using a tablet, but your brush isn't varying in opacity? Let's say it's like this. Well, there's two issues you could be having. One is that you don't have pressure sensitivity enabled. So to make sure it is enabled, click your Brushes tab. If you don't see this, go to Windows and click Brushes, or hit F5. And then you should see here some options. I'm using Photoshop CS3, so here it says Other Dynamics. If you're using a later version of Photoshop, let's say CS5, this option is called Transfer, but it does exactly the same thing. So you need to make sure this is checked on, and that this is set, the control. I have my opacity jittered at 0%, but make sure your control is set to pen pressure. So your flow jitter is off, and now it should work with the opacity having variation. Alright, but what if you have other dynamics checked and it's set to pen pressure and things still aren't working for you? Okay, then it could be a problem with your tablet preference file. So what you would do then is go to your start menu and find this called Wacom Tablet Preference File Utility. Click this and, well, first close Photoshop and then open this up, and then click under All User Preferences, click Remove, and then close this, reopen Photoshop, and it should work. I'm not going to demonstrate doing this because I have all my tablet functions mapped out. So for instance, I've customized it so I can flip just by clicking the tablet button, or I can undo things. So I don't want to mess that up, so I'm not going to remove my tablet preferences. But if things aren't working, then that's pretty much the only other thing it could be. I guess if that doesn't work, you can try updating your drivers or restarting your computer. Now, if you've got all your settings right, how do you get good blends? Well, for me it actually comes down to practice. Your tablet pen has pressure sensitivity, but you have to make sure you have control over that. And that requires you to practice building up your dexterity so you really have a light touch. And that just requires practice. You can see I have my opacity and flow at 100%, but I can still get pretty light and pretty dark. And it took me some time before I could handle the pen the way I wanted to with these settings. Before I would use lower opacity, let's say 20%, and this way that gives me a light color. I can't really get too dark, but if I want it to get dark, I just build over by going like this. But you can see it gets pretty messy when you have things at 100%. If you can just train yourself to get things so you can go really light, really dark, it's just, you have so much more control. But if you're impatient, you don't want to practice that, maybe it's better to work at a lower opacity. Anyway, let's get some colors down and I'll show how I blend them. Alright, so I want this green to smoothly blend into this yellow. So I'm going to take my brush, get some of the green, take some yellow, and then when the yellow meets the green, I lighten the amount of pressure I'm using, and that creates this third tone in the middle. Then I take that third tone, blend it out, take the middle tones that I'm creating, and just keep blending it back and forth. I'll see if there's any part that really stands out that needs to be blended more, and then I just use the Alt key to select the color, and then I blend. Now for me, I like things looking a bit painterly, so this is really good enough. But if you want a really smooth blend, well, if you don't want to use a gradient tool, there's a trick that Brad Rigney invented where you take your smudge tool and make it really big, and then you click the color you want, where you want to blend, then you just kind of shake your pen around a little bit, and what happens is the colors get blended super smooth. But you gotta use a big brush, and you have to make really tiny circular motions. You can see you get a much smoother blend. But for me personally, I don't really use this. It's not my technique, and I don't care if things look a bit messy. I just think it's painterly. There's a lot of different techniques to blend. I'm just showing you my technique. But for instance, I know one thing you could do to make blends is you get a brush, find some kind of soft brush, make it huge. Let's say I wanted to blend some blue into this. You can lower the opacity to, say, 10%, or 20 is fine. And then lightly go over the area and create these really smooth blends. And this kind of look is used a lot in like anime type images, where you just need a soft brush, low opacity, and it needs to be really big. Maybe the least important thing is the type of brush you use. You can create good blends without using a brush with any texture. Even with just a regular round brush, things are fine. And I use just the default hard round brush to paint. Not all the time, but I do use it. And it's really fine. You don't need to get so caught up in what brush you're using. It does make a difference. Let's say I wanted to do grass, and I have this brush with a grass texture. And yeah, okay, helps to have brush like this, but I don't really use things like this too much. So for me, I tend to stick with pretty much just a default brush. And the one I use the most is this 24 pixel spatter brush. Alright, and let's just say you are using a mouse. Well, if I was using a mouse, which I am now, I think I'd stick with my spatter brush. So I want to blend these two colors together. Just blend one out, change my opacity to 50%, take the other one, and take this middle color. And pretty much the same technique, it just takes longer. But it is possible, you know, use Brad Whitney's little thing. Let's see, it's harder with a mouse. But still difficult. Alright, so that's it. That's my method to blending. Thanks for watching.